First off, I just want to cover the fire season that we've just been through in the last, well, I suppose we started in October, and we did truly start in October. And first and foremost, I'd just like to thank you all for your involvement during the fire season, because there's no doubt it was a cracker. Not just for us, but certainly right across the state. One of the things that we didn't face during this particular fire season was any pressure to release or send units for out of area commitments, and that's mainly because everyone else was pretty flat out as well, and it would have been difficult to get out of area commitments, particularly from Region West, given the pressure that we were under with the fuel levels that we had. So just like to thank you all up front for the wonderful work that was done during the fire season. But as that slide says, Cobblers Brigade well prepared and successful, and in my mind there's absolutely no doubt about that. We were prepared for the season. We did know that it was going to be a difficult season. We have had a very easy time probably for the previous 3 seasons, but sooner or later we all knew that that was going to catch up with us, and we were going to be tested. Tested we were, and winners we were. So yeah, very good effort, and it's all the result of really the people in the room here today and all of your brigades for the wonderful work that was done to minimise the impact and make sure our communities were safe, and more importantly that they were informed. And there's no doubt in my mind that our communities were probably the best informed that they ever have been about the potential of the fire season well before it, and then during the fire season as fires did occur and impacts were made, the people were relatively well informed, in fact better informed than they were in previous years. So in terms of preparation, as I said, we had 3 years that were a little bit lax. We had wet summers, which was nice to have. You know, I remember a Christmas there that we got through 2 years ago without really any impact at all. It was just fantastic. We did have that February-March rainfall event, and we certainly suffered, particularly in our southern areas around Cowra, that suffered from flooding, but certainly right across Region West and right across the southern part of the state particularly, and the north coast part of the state. Floods were all over the shop. Queensland had floods. A lot of that water then come down through the Darling and its tributaries, and made sure that we had plenty of fuel growth around the place. In fact, the Rural Fire Service was certainly talking up statewide that this was going to be a real test for particularly western parts of New South Wales, where we hadn't seen fuel levels the same as we had for probably somewhere around about 50 or 60 years. In fact, I remember the Commissioner making a statement that there's more grasslands fuels out there than people have seen in living memory, and in some areas that was certainly the case. So record fuel levels right across central and western New South Wales. We had a dry winter leading into the summer period, so we had all that rain, all that growth, and then during the winter it just dried up, and with the frosts and the winter period that we had, a lot of that fuel started to cure off. That's when we knew we were going to be subject to a fairly difficult season. So in order to do that, we had to make sure that we were prepared, and certainly our region had a number of things in place to try and make sure that we were as prepared as what we could be. And there are a number of exercises and things that occurred at various levels, both at a state level, regional level and local levels, that helped us in that preparation. So the first one that we were involved in was the state operations exercise. So at State Ops at Homebush, there was the State Operations Centre was activated for the day, and there were somewhere around about 15 odd fire events. They were fire events that were occurring around the state, and basically we were one of those at Cobblers here. So we had a fictitious fire, but we ran it like a real fire and fed information into state operations. So we're actually testing the state operations systems to make sure that at that level they were prepared as well, but it also gave us an opportunity to actually test our own systems internally for our own fire control centre. All of our staff over the last 2 years have completed the command, control and communications training, and that's been a fantastic revelation for us in the way that we actually manage the operations and manage the way that we communicate not only with the fire ground, also with our communities and also with state operations to to achieve a greater level of resources. So that was certainly worthwhile. We had Region East group captains come and tour Region West for the first time ever. So there was a busload of group officers from the eastern part of the state who actually came out and toured all of Region West over a period of a week. And that was in preparation for making sure that if units were coming over to the other side of the range, tankers, crews, strike teams, that they understood the firefighting methodologies of western parts of New South Wales. There has been some criticism over recent years where crews will come over and they'll not exactly understand some of the local issues, and certainly with regards to fodder and stock and the way that we try and manage grass fires. So that was a big positive, and it had never happened before. So they actually attended here as well. This was their last stop before they went back to home. So it was good to have them last, because I think we left a fairly good message in their mind on their way back. So that was fantastic. We also had, for the first time ever, the what we call Canobex, which is canobolus exercises. The group officers around the Blaney Shire have been running an exercise now for many, many years, just in preparation for the fire season. And rather than run it at their normal place in their normal location at Neville, they decided to run it around the southern area of Mount Canobolus, which went really well and exercised almost all the brigade units in the Blaney Shire. And I think about a month after that, the group officers around the tablelands for this part of the world actually started to do a Canobex, which was again going to be on Canobolus, but because some rain occurred, it actually run out of Kinross. So that exercised about another 15 odd brigades, which was fantastic. And I suppose the next thing was then that we started to utilise, in the ramp up towards the fire season, we started to utilise the media quite significantly, and not just us, but at a state level, at a regional level, and at a local level, we started to do that as well. So some of the messages that are coming out of that you can hear quite clearly in every one of those film clips is bushfire survival plan. It's certainly one of the key messages that are coming out all the time. The website's been blogged to death. Up-to-date information is online at rfs.newsouthwales.gov.au. And more of that is, I suppose, going to come continually over the years. But like I said, it was the first real test since that particular fire event. And I think the state done a fantastic job. There was no lives lost this summer. We had certainly the most active fire season that we've probably seen for the last 15 to 20 years. A number of catastrophic days where the fire danger index went into catastrophic, at least for periods of days, and some major fires around the state that impacted on communities and habited areas, and yet there was limited structural losses, property losses, and like I said, no lives lost. So it was a fantastic result by all. We started our bushfire season at the normal time, or the statutory period, and that's unusual for us. We normally start 1st of November, but 1st of October is when we started. From that time, we actually then saw a bit of a dip in the number of fires that we were experiencing at the time, because September was quite a busy day. We finished as of 31st of March. We probably could have pulled it off a couple of weeks earlier because we had a little bit of rain and the weather started to cool off a little bit, but we thought it was quite important to stay with the statutory bushfire danger period so that we actually got the media of that bushfire danger period, and more importantly so that we weren't moving the goalposts all the time, confusing our residents and landholders. So we actually went with the statutory period, and it worked quite well. We put in place, in terms of preparation, we did put in place some standby arrangements with many of our brigades. So where we had a very high fire danger rating for that particular day, we had brigades either on standby at station or at least crews on call and available for the day. And certainly on the bad days, particularly during that early period of January, we had some plant strike teams on standby, which made a huge difference that we'll get to in a minute. So I'm going the wrong way. Righto. So in terms of support, the Region West Mick, and Mick is Major Incident Coordination. So for us, in case you don't know, that every region is represented in state operations by a Major Incident Coordinator. So we have one of our people, normally from the regional office, that's embedded within state operations during the bad weather events. And any time that we need anything, those people are our first port of call. We just get on the phone call, talk to them, and then they go and liaise with the rest of the people in state ops. And they sit in that fishbowl, if you like, to make sure that they represent our needs directly to the state operations controller. So they did a fantastic job this year. Paul Whiteley and his group, just absolutely sensational. We didn't really want for anything. The amount of support that we got from them during our fire activity period was just fantastic. So hats off to them. State Air Desk, once again, extremely supportive, and they've been one of our great allies over the last probably 10 years. But they've got a difficult job sometimes on bad days where they've got to juggle aircraft around to suit the requirements of the entire state. But there was really no time where we were left uncovered when aircraft were deployed, because as you know, we have got contract aircraft based at Cowra and contract aircraft based at Orange. Those contract aircraft can go anywhere in the state, but any time those aircraft actually left our area, they were always backfilled by another aircraft of some description. So there were very few periods where we were left bare. So it's just fantastic support from the State Air Desk, and we hope that relationship continues into the future. Within State Ops, there's also bushfire analysis personnel now, and do their own weather forecasting so that we can actually get real-time weather forecasts and at least prognosis of our fires, so we can get some maps and I suppose rate of spread type indications from our state operations colleagues through these guys. And certainly this is again the first year that they were really put to the test. They've only been in place about 18 months and done a fantastic job. In fact, I think the Shield fire, they give us a bit of a prognosis on that particular fire. This is the one that started at Woodstock. They had it up into the back of Mount Canobolas by their projections indicated that fire would be into the back of Mount Canobolas by about midnight that night if we failed to stop it before it got across the Labula River. So that wouldn't have been good for any of us nor the community of Southern Orange. The media involvement was fantastic, not just the pre-season stuff, but certainly during the fire season we had great support from local media, whether it was Central Western Daily, Prime, Win, a number of the radio stations, particularly the ABC, just fantastic support, contacted us almost every day. We must have, I suppose, particularly with television news, there would have been a rural fire service story on at least every second day on average, so it was pretty good. And you know, our particular website was updated every day, as it always is during the season, thanks to Bruce Reynolds and his team. And that amount of, I suppose, timely advice and relevant messaging just goes a long way to make sure that our communities are informed. We also commenced our Facebook site during January. One of our volunteers actually took that on, and that's gone on leaps and bounds since then. So I suppose we're into the next realm of the cyberspace now. I don't really understand Facebook that much, but I am getting better. But for those who do, it's a wonderful tool to spread information as well as the website. So fantastic. In terms of communications for our preparation, some of you would know that every year our radio sites undergo maintenance twice a year, every year, and that was no different this year. Our PMR page system is getting a little bit long in the tooth and it's due for renewal very shortly. So there were some problems that we found pre-season that took some time to fix, but fortunately everything was up and going and very reliable. There's one particular site that's not very reliable, but the rest of it is pretty reliable leading into the fire season. So that was good to see. Earlier in the year we did have GRN capability activated for all the radios in every tanker, so that gave us another communications network that we can use in the event that we had a major fire operation happen. Our biggest problem is with one radio network and 80 brigades across the 12,000 square kilometres we've got. It's quite easy to foresee that we're going to have more than one job on the the same day at the same time. And if we do, we're going to have competing interest for communications time, so we need other networks. GRN gives us that. We have, in the last 18 months, fitted some 25 VHF fireground radios in the tankers, particularly on the eastern side of the district, and that's an ongoing process that will continue on now for the next 10 years. Just gives you another string to your bow when it comes to communication. Our paging server has been upgraded in the last 10 months or so, and so that we have got the latest and greatest in terms of that activation capability. And last but not least in communications, our comms people. Our comms unit had been sort of bolstered and exercised through some of those other events I spoke of earlier with the CNOBEX and the State Operations Exercise. So they did a wonderful job for us through the summer, and some of you know these people, but without them we just haven't got a hope of coordinating the requests for logistics and operational information that you guys require on the fireground. So they did an outstanding job, particularly for that period during the middle part of, or the early part of January, where they were rostered on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for about 23 days, I think. So it was a good effort. All right, in terms of incidents, it was a busy year, and whilst we did have 2 Section 44 declarations, firstly the Long Point fire, which started on the 1st of, well actually started, yeah it did start on the 1st, it started after, well, around midnight. But during that fire we actually experienced all of our other fire events. So the Shell fire at Woodstock, the Gumbel fire, the Nango Road fire just out of Yagara, the Baldry Road fire just out of Cumnock, all occurred during that Section 44. So that was pretty good actually, given that we had things already in place. We didn't have to set up. We were already up and running for the Long Point fire, so it was just a matter of rolling into those other ones. So that level of preparedness and the activation level were at that time, we were able to make sure that we got things in place pretty quickly for all those other fire events on those bad days. And we'll talk a bit more about those other individual fires shortly. We also had a Section 44 declared for the Goldings fire. And the Goldings fire, Pete, you'll remember that one. That was, I think, the smallest Section 44 in the history of the New South Wales Rural Fire Service at 0.75 per hectare. Job well done, mate. That's sensational. David Hoadley, when he was at Blue Mountains about 18 months ago, or the summer before, I think, had a Section 44 that we took the mickey out of him a fair bit, because I think it was 1.5 hectares. So I think we called it a Section 22, then a Section 11, then a Section 6.5, as the smallest Section 44 in the history of the Rural Fire Service. But in true Canobola style, we bettered that. And he was away at, David was away at Coonabarabran at the time, and left us for redder pastures after the Long Point fire and all those other ones were wrapped up. And the day after he left, we ended up getting this Goldings fire. And the weather forecast for that day was quite, 2 days out was quite bad. It looked like being catastrophic weather for our particular part of the world. And we put in a request through the Region West MIC to have a preemptive Section 44 declaration. It was only about 4 days after we revoked the declaration for the Long Point fire. So we put in this preemptive declaration, and that was actually rejected. In fact, it was rejected by the MIC at the time under the guise that the weather forecast is looking much better than previously thought. And we said to Paul Whiteley at the time, look, we're reading the forecast, mate, and it looks pretty bad. So, you know, we need to get some things in place. We want to put some plant strike teams on standby and that sort of thing. Paul said, look, the updated figures are coming through. It'll be much better than what you're reading at the moment, so don't sweat it. Everything will be cool. Certainly it's not going to be a good day, but there won't be any need for a preemptive. So we had all the paperwork done up ready for submission for the Section 44 declaration. Unfortunately, we didn't get that because of those improved weather forecast figures. As it turned out, when the weather did roll around, it was actually worse than the original forecast. So it was quite a bad day. And in the afternoons, we got some lightning strikes, and we probably ended up with about 4 fires in the afternoon at various locations, one of which was this Goldings fire. And as soon as we got that one, and we were some distance from it, and we had units responding to it, we put in that preemptive, or that Section 44 declaration request. and immediately it was granted, and away we went. It was pretty much granted before we got on site, and that was a fantastic level of support from state operations and the commissioners. So there's no doubt that everyone was on their toes, and the fact that we got there quickly, the fact that we had plant there quickly, had aircraft there quickly, pretty much we wrapped that fire up in the first 2 hours, and were able to then revoke that Section 44 within about 30 hours. So it was not only the smallest Section 44, it's probably the shortest as well. So I did the Section 44 Incident Controllers report just a short time ago, so it didn't take me very long, so that was good. Just some figures there. What I've got there on the table is just the bushfire danger period figures. So the primary figures are the number of fires we actually get. The total responses is how many brigades we actually send to that fire, because there might be one fire that requires 3 brigades to attend. So for the bushfire danger period, 168 incidents in total, which doesn't seem like a great deal. And in total responses, we had 286 responses to those 168 events. And the financial year to date is just, so from 1st of July to yesterday, they're the figures that we've had. So we're looking at 444, and a nice symmetrical round figure, 444 incidents that we've had primary for the year so far. And that's probably for us around about a little bit above average, about 350 would be our average, and around about 500 would be a normal year. By the end of this financial year, 500 would be a busy year. So by the end of this financial year, I'd expect that we'll have 500, 520 incidents for the year, which is a busy year for us. We don't get the type of incidents that some other districts get, particularly on the East Coast, where you have those smaller type incidents that occur. Out here we don't tend to get those too much, so the incidents we do get are certainly real incidents that do require the attendance. So out of those 444 incidents, 296 of them were fire incidents. So the rest of them are MBAs and other jobs. So all in all, a pretty busy year for us. So for the incidents, in terms of the positives, then I haven't listed any negatives, because in my view we sorted out that through the debriefs that we had after the fire events, but I just want to dwell on the positives. There weren't too many negatives, which I really enjoyed this year. Firstly was the availability of our crews. You all know that we struggle at times to get bums on seats and get people for the initial response. And realistically, this year we didn't have much of that problem at all, particularly on the bad days. The readiness of our volunteers and their brigades was just fantastic for the year, and everyone was ready to rally as a call. All the fires we had were responded to rapidly, and as well as the fire crews, we also used aircraft and heavy plant to a great degree. And all of you will know that I think Canopolis is relatively well known for utilising aircraft sooner rather than later, and that's the way that we enjoy to do it, because all fires start small. If we can keep them small, we've got a good chance of putting them out while they're still small. So if you get there quick enough, you'll put a fire out with a cup of water. So if we can send as many resources as we can, as quickly as possible, then we'll keep them all small. And we actually did that, because our largest fire was 475 hectares, and that was the Long Point fire. And it probably only got to that size because we extended it somewhat to make sure that southern edge got locked away, and we probably backburned maybe a third of that area. So 475 hectares as our largest fire in the weather conditions that we had this summer is nothing short of outstanding, particularly when you look at our peers, other districts around Region West, where they did have the same weather conditions as what we had, and some of those fires got a bit of a run on and did a lot more damage than the fires we had. I personally like to think it's because of that those first 3 dot points there, the availability, the rapid response, particularly the use of plant and aircraft to assist the ground crews. Getting in there and getting it done quickly is really the key to winning the day. One congratulations I would give is to all of our group captains. They were used extensively during the summer as coordinators of fire grounds, and they were put under a bit of pressure this year, particularly at very short notice on really bad days, and did an outstanding job. And whilst over the years we've heard some brigade captains complain sometimes about group captains coming in and taking charge, I don't think there's any complaints at all, and people were quite happy to hand it over to the groupies as they arrived. And thank God you're here. Like I said before, no major injuries or loss of life. Only one house lost. That was at a fire we had, North Logan Road fire on the 23rd of December. Very unfortunate event, but to have only one house lost with the weather conditions that we suffered and the number of fires that we had, just fantastic. Another pleasing point was the local control that we had in place on all fire grounds. There was no interference, particularly in strategies and tactics at all from the Fire Control Centre or from the Incident Controller. The group captains that were on site were the fire ground commanders. They made the decisions on the day and they did all the jobs. And I think if we went around the room, John Keller, Bruce Noble, Ray Nash is not here unfortunately, the Nangar Road fire, Guy Noble, Peter Johnson, those guys certainly in the hot seat, certainly had all the control placed in their hands. And we were just a support mechanism to get the gear in place. And that's something that we're going to push and continue to push and make sure that that continues to occur so that local fire management stays on the fire ground. You make the decisions, you call the shots, we'll just give you everything you need to make sure the job happens. So just a couple of pictures now. This is, we started the season proper, I suppose, with the first of our major fire events on the 23rd of December. 2 days out from Christmas, we had some pretty awful weather. I think on that fire we had 6 fires at the same time in 3 different local government areas, and I don't think that I have ever been involved in such an arduous, hectic communications campaign for the afternoon. It was just bedlam. With 2 fires reported at Blaney, we probably had about 4 fires, or probably had about 7 fires reported at Cowra, but it was in fact 3 separate fires. And we also had a fire at Cabon. Bruce Noble had a fire at Yells Road, a lightning strike on top of the hill. And there was another one somewhere else that I can't remember. But unfortunately, that same fire that destroyed the house, this is it, the North Logan Road fire, destroyed a tractor, brand new John Deere tractor that just stopped because there wasn't enough air in the, one of the oxygen sensors on the engine said there's not enough air to keep this machine going, so it stopped, and because it stopped it then got engulfed by a fire actually, so it's a bit unfortunate, which has resulted in Cowra Council now looking at some of their new John Deere graders as to which ones they can deploy to fires because of these new electronics in some of our firefighting apparatus. Right. So that's the house that was destroyed. The name of the property, which eludes me at the time, can't remember. Urell. Mrs. Mitchell's house. She was not fussed by the loss of a house at all. She didn't like it at all, but say la vie. She wasn't home at the time, so they were just happy that no one was injured because no one was killed. This guy here is the Gumble fire on top of the hill at Gumble. In fact, that particular fire went for probably about 2 weeks, maybe more than that. Unfortunately for us, well, fortunately, we did have some containment lines already around that fire because we were planning on a hazard reduction activity in that locality. So there were some fire trails around certain parts of that particular fire ground. We just couldn't organise the lightning strike to happen in the right spot. But yeah, it was pretty good, and you know, the efforts of the local guys there at Gumble through the, you know, the salters and the support from you know, the surrounding brigades in Cumnock, Baldry, Manildra, etc. And the plant that we sent out to that fire pretty well straight away, and the aircraft that we sent to that fire had at least some containment on that pretty early. So it was good, but unfortunately it did break containment lines about the same day as that Baldry Road fire, I think it was. So about a week and a half later. This is the 1st of January. Actually the image on the left is taken on the 2nd of January, so this is a Long Point fire for those of you who know and love that country. Those those who do know and love it would know that it's land that God forgot. John Brisbane told me that God forgot to straighten it. It's quite, those who haven't been to Long Point, it's probably, along with the area to the south of Neville, probably the worst topography that we have in Canobolasone. Very steep, very mountainous, and quite unforgiving. So the river, fortunately the river bounded the fire on the eastern side, but we had to make sure that the north, the south and the western side of that fire was well contained. That's a line scan image taken out of the aircraft that flies over at quite some height. The left hand side image was taken on the second, the right hand side image was taken on the third. And the one taken on the third was, we haven't started backburning yet. In fact, the fire was wrapped up to, I think, John, somewhere down a little bit lower here. So there's a little bit more country to be burnt, but and a little bit. And Barry Carr hadn't sort of taken to the northern part of that by then, I don't think, because it's not quite up to the river. So a difficult job that was. Went for quite some time. Most of you would know that started by some illegal fireworks that were set off on the eastern side of the river at a camp on New Year's Eve. And unfortunately, the guy who set those fireworks off, while he did swim across the river and try to extinguish the fire, he actually did suffer some burns trying to climb up that steep hill. You know, it was a difficult fire. Went for the best part of, I think, 13 days or so. But that really led us into the fire season proper. Most people were awake by then, so bit of an example of the terrain that the guys were facing there, quite steep. A lot of that was inaccessible by any of the tankers, particularly on that eastern side of that fire. There was water available though, but it was a bit of a stretch to go and get it. So most of the dams, well, there's only a couple of dams in the area, copped a bit of a caning, but just a picture of the ridge line that was used on the western side of the fire to try and contain that, which did do a good job, but certainly the guys who did that job on that second night, I think it was a fairly arduous firefight, that's for sure. This is the Cumnock Fire, Baldry Road, started by our good friend the Engelgrider. This particular bloke who lives in a bit of a shack there hasn't thrown anything out. Everything he's accumulated over about the last 50 years is still around the place. That day was quite a nasty day. I think we had something like about 70 km/h winds that day. Probably temperatures out there, Don would have been sort of close to the 40s, I suppose. And yeah, very difficult day, spotting left, right and centre. We're able to get aircraft onto that pretty quick, and graders and a dozer onto that pretty quick as well. We've got some Bond Council gear onto that that was housed in Yeovil and Cumnock, and a dozer from Cumnock, local unit, plus aircraft. And the other good thing about that job was that we had the Larris Lee airstrip activated for that particular job, which is the first time that we've done that. This fire is the Shield Fire, just north of Woodstock. That fire started, we believe, from power lines clashing together, dropped the spark on the ground. Again, 60+ km/h winds, probably high 30-degree temperatures, low humidity. Off it went like a trooper, run across the top of the ridge. Apparently a very similar fire to the fire back 20 odd years ago, although not as big as the fire 20 odd years ago. But to wrap that fire up, I think it was about 420 hectares. To wrap that fire up before dark on a day like that, just unbelievable. So Peter Johnson and the crews that he had out there that day, just absolutely fantastic. That's a picture of the Shell fire looking from across the top of that ridge, from where the fire started to where it sort of run to, pretty much where it was pulled up. Fortunately, it ran into those couple of stubble paddocks there, a bit of a dam just to the south of this Penrose homestead up here. Those people were evacuated. There was a number of evacuations in place for that particular job, and it was a bit of a tense time for one and all out there on that day. But again, a sensational job to pull it up where they did. There's a roadway just along here, and it did jump that road a couple of times. right at the top of the picture, probably along this tree line here somewhere, would be the Balabula Way. If it got, that's the road from Mandurama to Canowindra. If it had got across that road, we may not have got it before it got to the Balabula River. If it had got across the river, then it's into some very nasty topography on the run up to the southern part of Mount Canobolas and into the back of Panuara there. So the smoke from this particular fire got as far as Dubbo by the afternoon, and we were getting calls from everyone between here and Dubbo saying, "Where's that fire?" And people wouldn't believe us when we said Woodstock. I remember one lady rang up about 4 times from Mundy Creek, asked me where the fire was, and when I told her it was at Woodstock, she said, "No way, there's no way, no, it's just outside here somewhere." I said, "No, it's at Woodstock." This is Bruce Noble's fire, the Nangar Road fire that occurred a couple of days after the Shield fire. In fact, we had some heavy plant working still on the Shield fire, just doing some remedial work that we tasked over to this particular job. And you can see that line scan image down there in the left-hand bottom corner is taken pretty much about an hour or so after that fire was first started. So you can see how intense it was with the brightness of that yellow. And the fire actually got to burn that whole, it was in a small, narrow timbered range. We believe it started by clashing power lines in windy conditions again, and on the side of the road, and it run through some grass into a timbered range, and basically that's where it stayed. Once it got into timber, it slowed down a little bit, although the intensity of the fire was still quite hot, and we were able to wrap that up pretty quickly. Again, because we had lots of resources, a fair degree of plant, and we had aircraft on the job pretty well straight away. So all very nice. Again, another picture of that fire, just showing you looking from the south to the north. You can see the containment line there that the graders have put in all the way around the timbered edge. So that was pretty much done on the first day. This was on the second day this photo was taken. And on the northern side, you can see there's some, this is on the northern side of the fire where it was actually stopped, and you can see some retardant lines there, that dark reddy crimson colour there. So retardant drops by aircraft to try and pull that fire as it's coming out of that grassland there. There was a bit of a close call there. There was a house pretty well close, so it's in that first photo that I showed you. So there's, you know, it was a pretty good job that that house was saved. It was the only house within close proximity, but the fire burnt to the edge of their backyard, basically. Pretty good job. As I said, aircraft were a major support activity during our entire bushfire danger period. The Orange and the Cowra air bases were heavily utilised, not just by us, but also by our surrounding zones and teams. Particularly the Cowra Air Base, you know, copped an absolute flogging because of the fire activity down in the southwest slope zone, and they had a torrid time, southwest slopes, for the fire season. Had a new manager in Andrew Dillon into the chair, and a couple of days after that he's just got fires everywhere. So whilst they haven't got an air base or an airport facility that's up to spec anyway for the type of resource requirements that we use, they use the Cowra Air Base. It was also utilised for the fires in the Crookwell Shire that was called the, anyone help me? No. Yeah, the Wangler Dam fire back up in Napa. Yeah, so we needed some support from the council to ensure that that things happened there to keep water up to the airport, because it was copping a flogging, that's for sure. Beautiful thing was that the Larrasley airstrip was used for the first time. We have put a lot of time and effort and negotiation in with both the Bond Council and a lot of our brigades to utilise some Section 94 funding to get that airstrip up and running. And for the Baldry Road fire outside of Cumnock, that was the first time that was used. First time that the crew from Burmese was utilised in filling the aircraft, and this particular video of the first landing. There's really good about this video. They're all wearing PPE. Everyone's got helmets on, they're all got goggles. They've never done this before. So just for, they've never done it before in action. that particular fire, there was something like about somewhere between 8 and 12 loads taken out of that particular strip, and given that it was only finished properly, maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 months before, fantastic to be able to use it in anger. And I think the flight time, once they took off to get the job, was about 1.5 minutes. So it just shows when you put the resources into place, you know, the water tanks, the large water tank, 240,000 litres that we put in place there, the pumping capability that is on site. Now there's a shed facility built there to house all the gear, and the effort that the locals put into making that strip a reality just pays off when the chips are down. So, first class effort. I don't know why I keep going back to that earlier one, but anyway. Alright, so in terms of lessons learnt, I've only got a little bit left. The Canopolis local control model was a success. Like I said, we do want fireground management, stay on the fireground. So that there's no interference, if you like, from the incident controller 50 odd kilometres away back in a fire control centre. We trust our group officers. We know that they've got the skills to do the job, and we just want to make sure that we give them the tools to do the job. So that was certainly quite a success this year, and we'll make sure that we hinge off that as much as possible and enhance it for future years. Heavy plant strike teams was certainly a big thing, and I know when David raised it with the region manager to get a strike team on standby, utilising heavy plant, dozers and graders. Some of those were located here at the Fire Control Centre, some of them were located around the zone at various locations, but they were all on floats, on standby, with drivers ready to go. And that was really the key to our success of keeping those fires small. As soon as we got a fire, we just told the drivers to go, and instead of being 2 or 3 hours away, they were 40 minutes away. So it made a big difference. One of the things we certainly need to do is just work on that ground crew relationship with the aircraft. There were a number of times where our aircraft can't drop their loads on the ground because we've got some ground crews that are still too close to the fire edge, and we don't want to be dropping 3 tonnes of retardant on them, do we, Bruce? So Bruce had that experience about 3 or 4 years ago, not because he was too close to the fire ground. It was a very small fire in that case, so couldn't really do anything about it. But it can be put in some risk when you've got 3 odd tonnes of product coming down on your head. So we need to work on that a little bit. And in terms of future planning, our pre-incident plan that we're working on at the moment, which will flow out of our risk management plan that we've just submitted for endorsement by the Royal Fire Service. We will have a zone level pre-incident plan that keys in some of the success factors of this particular season. So we'll set some standby triggers for things like standby arrangements for crews, either at station or available straight away. Certainly heavy plant standby. Our fireground management needs. Our group captains were certainly flogged this year when we were putting into those jobs as fireground managers, and we need to make sure that we give them some support. So we'll be looking at sending 2 or 3 group captains out in the initial phases of the job just to make sure some of those logistical things get taken care of. And that maintenance of local control is certainly a priority of ours, so that'll be endorsed by that particular pre-incident plan. And certainly the next level, I suppose, particularly with regards to activation, is just the utilisation of other media to make sure that we can activate our crews. We're currently using pages, and that's all well and good, but we need to be a little bit smarter with contacting people. Not everyone carries pages. It's only of our brigades, of our 80 brigades, I'd expect that probably 60% of them are reliable pager users. The rest of them still rely on telephones and text messages and that sort of thing. So we probably need to start encouraging things like telephone trees, with mobile phones, particularly smartphones, where we can send group text messages from, if we page a particular brigade, and then that brigade has an internal sort of system where they send off messages via text to their response volunteers. That's probably the next level that we need to concentrate on, as well as things like our Facebook and Twitter and website type activations as well, or use as well. So but the next step for us is to try and make sure that we keep pace with technology to make things easy for you guys to actually get in the truck and do the job. All right, that's about it from me. there's any questions, happy to take them. Errol.
But I had a question asked me last week when I was doing a training session with one of the smaller brigades about total fire bans and firearms.
Yep.
Was covered under. I know the answer now, but maybe it should be mentioned so people know what the case is. And also, we talk about angle grinds and things like this when we're putting warnings out. Maybe we could also add firearms to it as well.
Yep, okay. Yeah, we can certainly do that, some of our media messaging. Yeah. So the question for everyone else's benefit is that is there a restriction on firearms during a total fire ban? And the answer is not really, because total fire bans are about stopping people from lighting or maintaining fires. And when you're using a firearm, you're not actually doing either of those two things. So whilst using firearms can certainly start a fire, as can using welding gear, angle grinders, that sort of stuff, you're not maintaining a fire. So that's what a total fire ban is all about, lighting and maintaining fires. But certainly, as all of you know, angle grinders and welding equipment, hot work type gear is some of our worst enemies on a hot, dry, windy day. Even where people are in sheds. We had a fire out at Lucknow which was started by an angle grinder. The guy was in the shed, sparks got outside the shed, started a fire he didn't even know, and almost burnt down 2 houses next door. So certainly one of those things we need to keep in the minds of people. So thank you very much.